day one of JadeHelm. It was about a week ago that the Washington Post did a story. JadeHelm 15, heavily scrutinized military exercise to open without media access. That's exactly a week ago, July 8th. Actually, a week before that, they reprinted a mocking article that had been circulated a couple of months ago, making fun of the people in Bastrop, Texas, for being concerned and wanting to know what their government is. I mean, why should the slaves ever question what our masters tell us? And of course, these are the guys who want to be our masters. They want to master the human domain. That includes us, especially us. That's where they're training here. So a week before, they had this mocking article saying, the Americans are coming, the Americans are coming, they're invading Texas. That was never our concern. And we've made this clear from the very beginning. We didn't think this was going to be the onset of martial law. If that was ever the plan, of course, that's not going to be the case now because it's widely understood what's going on with JadeHelm. But now we saw about a week ago, Washington Post actually talking about how there wasn't going to be any media access. They said embedded reporters will not be permitted at any point during the exercise. This is from Lieutenant Colonel Mark Lastoria, same guy who went to Bastrop. The Washington Post pointed out that for several times they have requested access to observe JadeHelm. They said they made the case to the military that firsthand coverage would help to explain the mission. Yeah, see, if you don't have anything to hide, like these multinational treaties that are being done in secret, like pretty much everything our government is doing in secret, we keep hearing these assurances that, you know, these treaties that we're doing, they're going to be great for you. You're going to win. That's what the American politicians tell the Americans. The European politicians tell the Europeans they're going to win in these trade agreements. But they won't show us the trade agreement. They tell us, don't worry, we're not going to give monopolies to Monsanto or the big pharmaceutical companies. But just trust us. We can't show you the agreement right now. They can't show us what's going on. It was a year ago that the military was meeting in the Pentagon, and one lady stood up there that was an officer. She stood up to the guy who was the head of the press corps, I think. I don't remember what his exact title was, but she said, nobody believes us. They say that we're just giving them mindless propaganda. How do we get through that? And he goes, yeah, it's a problem because, you know, we got Drudge out there and we got all these different alternative media and the internet. And I mean, these people are questioning what we do and pointing out when we lie to people. So the Washington Post is telling them, hey, let's just have firsthand media coverage. You can shut down all the speculation about what you're doing, which they call conspiracy theories. Okay, if you investigate, if you question the official story, that's always called a conspiracy theory. Come on, can we move on past that? That was something that was created by the CIA 50 years ago after the Kennedy assassination to shut down any questioning of the ridiculous official story at that point in time, and they've used it to try to cover up every ridiculous lie they've told us since then. We're not supposed to investigate. We're not supposed to question. That's precisely what an investigator does for a police department. Where they're investigating murder or some other crime, they always come up with plausible scenarios. Who benefits from this? What can we learn about this? They try to uncover facts. They try to put together stuff because nobody comes out and says, well, this is what happens. And of course, our government doesn't operate in a transparent mode anymore. So the Washington Post says, hey, give us firsthand media coverage. We could shut down the speculation. But Lastoria said, this is what the Washington Post says, Lastoria told us it's not possible to allow a journalist to travel with special operation forces in the field. He cited the isolated nature of the mission and the need to protect the identities of the special force troops. But then they point out, well, the military has granted access to special operation training in the past. They said in one recent example, a journalist observed the exercise Robin Sage in North Carolina. Remember when they talked about that? Remember when we said, hey, what are you doing here? They said, we do this stuff all the time. We do Robin Sage every year in North Carolina. And of course, you know, they tell us it's the same thing. Well, it's not the same thing. They allow journalism coverage in Robin Sage in North Carolina. They do Robin Sage every year. They don't do this particular exercise, and they go on with this. They say the exercise was considered to be a final test for Green Beret soldiers in training. It calls for them to work through a scenario in which they organize a guerrilla force to overthrow the government of the fictional nation of Pineland. There's another difference between JadeHelm and Robin Sage. As Louis Gohmert pointed out, he had been in the military for a long time. I think he retired as a captain. He said, we always had fictional areas that we went against. You know, we trained in military bases, not outside of the military bases amongst the civilian population. But of course, this is an exercise that doesn't have a fictional basis. That's one of the things that he was concerned about. One of the things we're concerned about. Look, we don't need the military conducting exercises outside of military bases. We don't need the military training to take over civilian populations outside of the military bases. Understand that when the military does these training exercises, and we're seeing these things happening all along, they come up to intimidate Russia in the Ukraine or what. They do military training exercises in the Mediterranean. They go into the Ukraine. They do these various exercises. Both Russia and the U.S. do this. They've always done this. Go right up close to where they're going to be fighting, do the training. It's a method of intimidation, okay? It's also a method of intimidation. So at one point, I remember this interview with Vladimir Putin. We've played it on InfoWars before, where some guys telling him, hey, these exercises that are being done on the border of your country, they're not directed at you. And when the translator ran that through, Putin looked at him and just laughed for about 20 seconds. Come on. We know the same thing. We've seen these exercises being built up year after year after year. We saw them marching people out in the dead of night in Fort Lauderdale. They typically don't tell people that, you know, we see this being this kind of training going on when it was happening in L.A. They talk to someone, he says, well, you know, you train the way you're going to fight. Where are you going to fight? If you're going to fight in the mountains, you train in the mountains. If you're going to do it in the desert, you do it in the desert. If you're going to train in American cities, you train in American cities with the police. Of course, you know, we don't need this kind of training. We don't need special forces operating as boots on the ground for the NSA. That's what they've put themselves out there for. That's what McRaven was shopping himself out for. That's the thing that concerns me the most, okay? That we would have the military putting themselves out there as boots on the ground for the NSA. And if you understand what human domain analytics is about, if you understand what mastering the human domain is about, that was the keynote title, the title of the keynote speech at the U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Foundation a couple of years ago. What they're doing is they're collecting biometrics on you, not just the fingerprints and everything. And of course, we got another article here about how the government has just lost 21 million fingerprints, have been hacked for that, after losing millions and millions of Social Security data, losing their employees' data. I mean, really? Are we supposed to trust these people? But the scariest thing about this is that they're taking this biometric information, they're combining it with activity-based intelligence so that they can track everywhere you go. That becomes the ultimate biometric. That was a report that we did that Rob Jacobson put together. Jakari Jackson narrated that just a couple of weeks ago, talking about how the ultimate biometric is your activity-based intelligence. Who you know, where you go, when you go. And that's not our quote. That's not our summary. That's the summary of IBM's man who works in this field. This is the coming area, the up-and-coming area of intelligence. It's been there for a long time. It's been a U.S. Geospatial Intelligence Group for at least 15 years. That's when James Clapper was put in charge of it. It predates that. It's a massive part of the military-industrial complex, and the Special Forces people, Admiral McRaven, when he was there as commander, was looking for increased involvement with Special Forces. We should be very concerned that a government that wants to track us everywhere we go, know everything about us, denies everything, denies us knowing anything about them. We should be very concerned when they start combining with troops, labeling our states, our real areas, as enemy areas, and create an exercise that's going to last for a couple of months. This is an intelligence gathering operation. It began when people pushed back against it. They wanted to mark down who's for them and who's against them. Well, put me down as against this. I have no intimidation about saying that. Put me down as against a militarized police state. A standing army is a danger to this republic, and it is no better example of this than military exercises that say they're going to be moving amongst the population, trying to keep from being detected. It's unconventional warfare. Unconventional warfare doesn't mean it's just a little bit different from what they've done before. It's a very specific term. This is what Special Forces do. They go in, they identify who in the government they can work with, who is going to be opposed to them, so they know who to take down, who to reward, who to do their dirty work. It's a PSYOP operation. That's also part of unconventional warfare, but they're combining this with geospatial intelligence, biometric information. This is pre-crime profiling. You should be very concerned about this. Very concerned. Let me give you an example. When you look at police pre-crime profiling, that is being passed over to artificial intelligence, as we're seeing increasingly, a good example of how this can go wrong, and it already has, as they're developing the software. They have all these cameras watching people. They have so many cameras, they can't hire enough people to watch us, to look at those cameras. Same problem that the East German Stasi government had, right? So what's the solution? Well, now they've got computers that they can program, and they can give them these algorithms. So here's an example. One of these tests, they were looking at a guy who was standing next to his car for a while. And then the camera and the AI noticed that this guy who was standing next to this camera for a little bit of time, all of a sudden kneels down and disappears. Ah, they say, this looks like a car theft. So they dispatch 911. The guy was changing his tire. But of course, in this environment, where the police are being trained by the federal government to shoot first and don't even ask any questions, that could wind up getting someone killed. We need to understand what our founder said, what Madison said. A standing army is a danger to the republic. The means of defense abroad have always become the tools of tyranny at home.
From the water table to our soils to the atmosphere itself, our world is becoming more and more toxic each and every day. But it's not just the air outside that's toxic. Indoor air has been shown to have 2 to 5 times higher concentrations of pollutants than even outdoor air. And most Americans spend 90% of their time inside using toxic chemicals within their homes. There are more than 42 million smokers in the United States. Well over 1,000 types of mold and mildew linked to numerous conditions. And don't forget the fact that 6 million Americans live with pets they're allergic to as well. When I began to research these statistics, it was clear to me it was time to start cleansing my lungs in order to combat the toxic environment that we cannot escape, but that we can fight back against. Made with organic and wild cultivated herbs and manufactured in the USA, the new InfoWars Life Lung Cleanse is here in a convenient spray bottle that can be brought with you throughout any toxic environment. Now available exclusively at InfoWarsLife.com or by calling toll-free 888-253-3139.